Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Wednesday, December 11th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined by Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon and RCP Senior Elections Analyst Sean Trende. So, gentlemen, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy have been courting Congress to get support for Trump's Department of Governmental Efficiency. And at least some Democrats are saying they want to work with DOGE. Representative Ro Khanna says he welcomes spending cuts, at least when it comes to the Pentagon, and he's not alone. So, Carl, what do you make of the Democrats' apparent willingness to do business with Trump on this issue, if not others?
Well, we'll see if they're serious about it, Andy and Sean, because it's easy to say we'll work with them. I remember a newly installed President Barack Obama saying he would work with the Republicans on the budget. He was interested in any good ideas they had. Meanwhile, Nancy Pelosi they'd already done the markup in the House, and behind closed doors, President Obama was telling John Boehner, "Hey, elections have consequences. We won, you lost." So it's easy to say these things. If the Democrats are serious, though, and look, progressives saying, well, yeah, okay, we don't want to cut anything but Pentagon spending, that may not be a non-starter with President-elect Trump the way it would have been with previous Republicans. Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, have made noises like that they think there's fat in the government, maybe even in the defense budget. So it's an interesting gambit. And if it's but to your question, Andy, it's also quite a contrast from when Donald Trump won the first time. Basically the attitude then was on, the Democratic Party, well, half the Republican Party and most of the media was, we don't want to let this guy be president. You're not hearing that this time. And so what struck me about it was just a difference in tone from the last time the guy came here. It sounds like they can't pretend he's not the real president or the legitimate president. And it sounds like they're acting accordingly.
So, Sean, is it different this time with the Democrats, do you think?
Oh, it's completely different. I mean, people forget that at this point in 2016, Elizabeth Warren was trying to get together a group to figure out how they could impeach Trump before he'd even taken office. I mean, that's when the whole emoluments clause narrative started, was during the first effort, 3 days after the election, to try to impeach Trump. So it's different. Look, I think since Trump won the popular vote, there's just not really grounds to deny his legitimacy this time around. And it was big enough that you can't chalk it up to Russians or whatever. I think there's a sense, though, among some Democrats that there was a bit of a missed opportunity with Trump the first time around, because he is a deal maker. And he's someone who doesn't have strong ideological priors. And so I think there is a sense, now who knows, it may be we're going to cut $20 billion from the defense budget, but wait till you see what we have for health and human services, and the whole thing blows up. I think there is going to be less of an aggressively, anti-Trump posture, just as a matter of course this time. Yeah.
Well, Bernie Sanders said this about Elon Musk. He said, Elon Musk is right. The Pentagon, with a budget of $886 billion, just failed its 7th audit in a row. It's lost track of billions. Last year, only 13 senators voted against the military-industrial complex and a defense budget full of waste and fraud. That must change. So, Carl, there's Bernie Sanders talking about working with DOGE. I mean, would you have expected that? And again, I guess the question is, does it cross over into any other areas of the budget other than defense?
Well, you think about this, the Pentagon spending is close to $1 trillion a year. Right. We know there's fat in it, but also we spend nearly that much on paying interest on the national debt. And anybody who looks at this, the fiscal house of this country is not in order. It's a disaster, and it's going to get worse. And we're not, this country is not at war. There's no reason we should even have deficit spending. Historically, going back, I'm talking about not to Lincoln's presidency, beyond, and World War II, the government borrowed money when it had an emergency that couldn't have possibly been foreseen, to run the these 800-900 billion-dollar deficits every year. That, I mean, who thinks that isn't real money? So I think there's an appetite for getting government spending under control. We could have another show and talk about how, if you're going to do that, you have to rein in entitlements. But that's not the only place that there's fat in the budget. And I think that I agree with you about Trump. And Sean points out, Donald Trump doesn't owe anybody anything in terms of party bosses. He basically took over the Republican Party. If he wants to be fiscally prudent, if he wants to bring back the tariffs of William Howard Taft era, he's got a mandate to do this. He ran on all this. He won election, and I think he wants to make his mark. That thing he said the other day, we talked about it, to Kristen Welker. The revenge is going to be getting this country successful again. That's going to resonate with a lot of Americans. And the first place they can start is the federal budget.
Yeah. Well, Sean, though, talk about the defense budget for just a second, because this is not the first time people have said, oh, my gosh, there's waste and fraud and abuse at the Pentagon. This goes back to Eisenhower. This goes back to Al Gore. You guys probably remember the $600 hammer that the Defense Department supposedly bought.
That was in the Reagan administration, right?
Yeah, but what I remember about Gore is he had the Hammer Award, which part of his reinventing government. Do you remember this, Carl? He gave these awards to people, various government agencies who were helping him reinvent the government, and they were all. The award was a $5 hammer with a bow on it, and he did that because I
clevered Rigo, and I never looked too closely at that, but I always assumed that expensive hammer was, when you're flying at Mach 2 and you had to do it on a high-end performance airplane, I assume there was a reason for it. Maybe there wasn't.
Well, I actually, the reason for it, I don't know why I know this, but it was because they allocated overhead across all these different things. So whatever the hammer cost, it had an overhead cost that was averaged against it. Anyway, that wasn't the point of my question.
Sorry.
My point of the question, Sean, was just, can this be done, or is this just, another tilting at windmills?
So since we're telling stories about the military spending, and my dad was in the Air Force. He was a colonel by the time he retired, and he worked on AWACS. And there was a big thing about the $20,000 toilet on the AWACS. And so we got a tour, and he was showing me this. I was in high school debate, and so I was following these things. He was like, you saw the $20,000 toilet, and it was like, this like metal toilet with handrails, and it all had to be riveted in place, and like there had to be a special evacuation system for it, because they had to, you'd think the AWACS, they have to go around in circles sending radar for hours and hours and hours doing mid-to-air refueling. So there was actually, I don't know if it had to be $20,000, but it was actually like the entire toilet system too, because the way it was installed, the sink was, anyway.
Hey, but Sean, can I tell a quick AWACS story? You got me going. Since we're going behind the curtain of politics, the AWACS was this airplane, fighter jet that could defy satellites. That it was right. You have these satellites, and the Russians couldn't track them, presumably. Well, the Saudi Arabian Air Force wanted them. The Israelis were dead set against it. Menachem Begin said, no, they can't have them. Well, Ronald Reagan twisted arms, and he got to sell the jets to Saudis. And afterwards, the White House press secretary came out and gave this very anodyne statement. The president wants to thank all members of the Senate on both sides of the aisle who worked diligently, blah, blah, blah. And but what Reagan actually told, and Mike Deaver put in his book, what he actually said after the vote was, he said, Mike, I feel like I crapped a pineapple.
Carl, that story was worth it.
Thank you, sir.
For the payoff.
So look, I think there's lots of money in the defense budget. The problem you're going to run into is that, we still, and this is a tug of war within the Republican Party itself, but, we still want to be able to fight wars in two theaters at the same time. And we've been cutting the defense budget for a very long time, since the Cold War. And so you have to find these cuts that can be made that also don't compromise military readiness. Now, part of it is, Trump has campaigned and his base is dead set against forever wars. So to a certain degree, they're probably fine with degrading some military assistance as long as we can defend the homeland.
Yeah.
Although we
So
are
that's
going to
gonna-
want the technology to shoot down Iranian drones over New Jersey. I think we're going to retain that ability.
Oh my God. Like, I can't decide if that story's true or just like a rep making stuff up, but apparently it's true. I don't know.
Too
But,
good to check, Sean.
yeah, exactly.
Well, just to wrap up this segment, Carl, are there any other areas other than defense where you think that the Democrats and Republicans could get together around this sort of DOGE idea?
Well, what Donald Trump has talked about in terms of the federal government is not weaponizing the Justice Department.
Mm-hmm.
And Democrats, including Adam Schiff this week, boy, Donald Trump shouldn't be coming in and saying he's going to go after his enemies. But then there's, clips on X and other social media of Adam Schiff saying we got to indict Donald Trump. There's an opportunity here for Democrats to agree with these things that they've long agreed with in principle and sort of put aside when it was Trump. The Justice Department shouldn't be weaponized. I think most Democrats privately agree with that. I think that some of his priorities, they're not all budgetary, are things that Democrats historically would have said, yes, we agree with. There is a chance for a reset and to meet this guy where he is. You mentioned at the outset, both of you, that Trump's a deal maker. When he was first elected in 2016 and 2017, we did an event and I was the moderator. It was the energy sector. We had people from oil industry, fossil fuels, fracking guys were there, nuclear, wind, solar. Everybody was there. And one of the speakers that I had, a keynoter, was he was a labor leader, the laborers union, which is one of the biggest unions in the country. And it's an old style union. And the guy was an old style union leader, left-wing guy from San Francisco who'd worked hard for Hillary Clinton. But somebody in the audience once said, well, Sean, you sound like you can work with Donald Trump. And he said, I have worked with Donald Trump. He said, not all, some of his buildings when he was in construction were union, some of them were not. But when we dealt with him, we were able to sit down and he likes to build things. He likes to get things done. If the Democrats have that attitude with Trump, they might find a willing partner.
Yeah. Sean, you got any areas where you think the Democrats and Republicans could work together?
I mean, I think there's obviously going to be a big war over immigration, but I think in general, like Trump could have got the infrastructure bill that Joe Biden got done. Trump could have gotten it done in his first term if the Democrats weren't, in reflexive, Trump shouldn't be allowed to get anything done mode. They could probably get another one. He's not going to feel constrained by the traditional Republican revulsion against federal spending as such. I think. Look, they're still miles apart on a lot of things. And so the trick is going to be separating the things out that they can agree on from the things that they just, can't play ball on. I think one of the interesting things is going to be the declassifications that I suspect are coming. My personal theory is that one of the things for getting RFK Jr. on board was that all the JFK files are going to come out. But part of what Tulsi Gabbard and the FBI guys, a lot of what's going to happen is basically like what the Church Commission really wanted back in the 70s. Like right. Democrats and people on the left used to really, really want these agencies reined in. And so we're going to find out how much, the heirs to that mindset really mean it.
Yeah. Well, guys, we're going to have to leave it there. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Sean Trende and Carl Cannon. We're going to take a break and be back right after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Sean Trende and Carl Cannon. And guys, yesterday we talked about public support for Trump's plans to deport illegal immigrants with criminal records. But Sean, there's a more controversial idea, and that is this idea of revoking birthright citizenship, which is, as we know, covered in the Constitution. The Constitution basically says that if you're born within the boundaries of the U.S., you are automatically a citizen. So Trump, over the weekend on Meet the Press, called birthright citizenship citizenship ridiculous, and he says he will issue an executive order to end it. Can he do that, or does the 14th Amendment block that from happening?
I mean, he can do it, but the 14th Amendment blocks it from taking effect. So what he needs are like 3 more justices to make that happen. There is a Supreme Court case from I want to say 1898 where, and it's actually a very well-reasoned case. There was a dissent. It wasn't a unanimous opinion. So it's not like the people who say birthright citizenship isn't a thing are completely nuts. 2 Supreme Court justices agreed with them, including Justice Harlan, who was a very well-respected jurist from that time. It's decided. It's a well-reasoned opinion that goes into like feudal conceptions of like what happens when a country invades another country and takes over territory. What's the legal status of the people that the country has invaded? It's really complex stuff. The bottom line, though, is they're not going to reverse it. There is some debate. Wong Kim Ark, the guy that was the subject of that case, was the child of permanent residents, not people in the country illegally. So that's one potential distinction that people could draw. But given the reasoning of that opinion, I think it's going nowhere.
So is the TikTok on it that Trump might sign an executive order, it would be challenged, the courts would look at it and basically not support the executive order? Is that reverse the executive order?
Yeah, they're going to file a case. They'll file for an injunction in the District Court of Hawaii, and it will immediately be enjoined. It'll go up to the Ninth Circuit, which will affirm the injunction. And the Supreme Court, I think, it'll be even unlikely to take the case up. Maybe you get a dissent from Justice Thomas, and maybe Gorsuch says, "Yeah, I'd like to revisit that case as well."
Well, Carl, I was looking into this. There's about 30 countries that have the same sort of birthright situation that we do now. It's not universal. So apart from the constitutional law, is it a good idea? I mean, should we revoke the whole idea of birthright citizenship, if we could? Just from a policy point of view, it's pretty popular. I think about 50% of
about half the
people
country,
I saw in a poll said that they would be for it.
Yeah, well, depends how it's worded, but 49 or 50%. Yeah, it's equally divided. And the question is, and the question asked in the polls usually is, should the children of the illegal aliens or people who are illegally be granted this right? Now, the 14th Amendment says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States. And then there's this funny clause in there, Sean knows it, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. There's a move in Congress now to by statutes define that phrase, and subject jurisdictions thereof, meaning if you're an illegal immigrant, you're not subject to the jurisdiction. Seems like weird semantics to me, because we can't say we're going to deport them because they're not obeying our law and then say they're not subject to our laws. But as a practical matter and a political matter, not a constitutional matter or a legal matter, because Sean's a lawyer, so I don't want to practice law without a license. But as a political matter, if a person is born here, let's just say, for the sake of argument, their mother was pregnant when she came here, or became pregnant shortly thereafter. This person, you're going to say this person is not a citizen of the United States. Well, what country are they a citizen of? They've never lived anywhere here. The kids who come here, some of them grow up, they don't speak any language other than English, and they speak American English, and they're Americans by outlook and temperament. And you're going to say, no, you're actually a citizen of Haiti. Well, I've never been to Haiti. So as a practical political matter, I think it's a very difficult thing to revoke, even if you could get a majority of the judges. I don't think it would be popular. You're asking people hypothetical now. If you started asking in these individual cases, should children of these, if you were 8 months pregnant and your boyfriend was in a Venezuelan gang and he's taken over an apartment in Aurora, Colorado, should you be a citizen up here? It's easy to say, no, that person should be back in Venezuela. But that's not, most of these cases are the way it's happened for 200 years in this country. Their parents come here, They have, they don't yet have papers, and they decide to start a family. And you're just not going to find any kind of majority or even close to that of the American people who think those people can't be called Americans.
But
And I think
Do you agree, Sean?
well, there's one other, I agree, but I think there's one other thing that goes around all this, the deportations and everything. It's like 2015 called and it wants its Republican coalition back. You know, Donald Trump almost carried Hispanics. He carried them in Texas. As a matter of fact, I went back and I did the math. And if non-white voters in Texas had voted the same way they voted back in 2008, Trump would have lost Texas. And if they voted the way that they voted in 2016 in Texas, he would have only won it by a point. The GOP has bled out among college-educated white voters, and it has offset them by making gains with a lot of these voters that the great replacement theorists now want to kick out of the country. That's another reason that's politically crazy. This is the future of the GOP.
I guess what animates part of this is this whole idea of anchor babies, which is, the sort of that people actually come here to have a baby here in order to sort of anchor their family here with people say that's a myth. I'm sure it happens. I don't know how often it happens. But the politics of this, I think, are interesting too, because the accusation is that by going after this aspect of immigration, is apart from going after sort of recent illegals or going after criminals, especially, that Trump and Stephen Miller, his sort of aide-de-camp on this stuff, that they actually want to cut legal immigration as well, Carl. That's at least what some of the critics are saying. What do you make of that argument?
Well, it's really two arguments. The anchor babies thing, it's not a myth. It happens. It's just rare. A lot of people come here from China, and they're not sending women here to have babies and then move them back to China. They're hoping to anchor is a key word. They're hoping to get call them foothold babies. They're hoping to get a foothold in America. That's what we've always encouraged. But in terms of cutting illegal immigration, this country accepts between 1 million and 1.5 million legal immigrants every year, and has for 40 years. And almost all of them come from Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and Mexico. And so to say this is a racist country is frivolous, really. But Donald Trump has made it clear, in his all caps, his signature all caps tweets and stuff, that he's talking about illegal immigration, not legal immigration. I suppose if you get into this and you had what this term of art on Capitol, comprehensive immigration reform. Comprehensive immigration reform might include legal immigration too, and you might and then the country could ask itself: we're taking between 1 million and 1.5 million people a year. Is that the right amount? Is it too many? Is it too few? Are we using the right criteria? Now we have this family unification, we call it. Critics call it chain migration. Is that or we should take people with skills? If you're going to do comprehensive immigration reform, and the Democrats, when they're out of power, say they want that, and when they're in power, don't do anything about it, you would probably add legal immigration to the mix. But there's no evidence Donald Trump wants to cut this for racial reasons. He hasn't said anything like that.
Yeah. Sean, what do you think we'll end up with here? Will we have comprehensive immigration reform anytime soon?
I think it's tough, unless Republicans are willing to nuke the filibuster over this. Like you're just not going to find the compromise. I think is kind of what Carl was alluding to, that you change the immigration thresholds to entice more kind of highly educated tech workers and such. Now that's actually turns our modern immigration program into the Great Replacement, because it's the kind of more downscale immigrants who care about the social issues and are moving towards the GOP. But setting that, I know I'm not supposed to swear on this program, so I won't say what I really think about Stephen Miller and that crew. But it's just stupid. But look, that type of compromise is very difficult to hammer out, and it's just kind of ironic because both parties are taking a theory of their coalition to the table that's actually the opposite of what it actually is, but it's just been it's informed their traditional views on the immigration issue. So I'm skeptical anything's getting through. The parties are just too far apart.
The last time we had a chance for it was 2007.
Right.
No, excuse me, 2004. Bush was president, and it was killed by a filibuster, a poison pill amendment that Barack Obama, a young freshman senator, voted for, and Ted Kennedy begged him not to do it. And you would have had a path to citizenship for dreamers and some quotas, some real enforcement on the border. And when it came down to it, they didn't want Bush or John McCain to get any credit for it, and it didn't happen.
What might happen as we kind of talk it through, you might get more money for border enforcement, and in a reconciliation package that can pass the Senate with 50 votes. But as far as getting, actual changes to the immigration policy, and look, I'm one of those guys. I think the solution to illegal immigration is more legal immigration. But the actual getting some kind of comprehensive package, I just don't happen. I don't see it happening. The Republicans will just like the Democrats were able to get a bill through with 50% that doubled the size of the IRS. The GOP's will just double the size of the Border Patrol.
Right. Okay. Well, gentlemen, we've got to leave it there for a second. And Sean, I appreciate you not working blue on the show today. That does happen occasionally. But Tom Bevan isn't here today to sort of.
No, Tom. It's the Tom Bevan codicil.
Yeah, right. Anyway, you're listening to Real Clear Politics, and we'll be right back after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Sean Trende and Carl Cannon, and I want to talk about pardons. This idea that Biden might pardon a raft of officials that would include Anthony Fauci and Senator Adam Schiff. This idea hasn't really gone away. Some people are advocating that he pardon more people, but Bill Ackman asks a question I think that a lot of people are asking, which is, before anyone gets a pardon, shouldn't the crime be disclosed? So, Carl, does he have a point?
Oh, yeah, he does have a point. I've defended the pardon power given to the presidents by the founders because they didn't want our president to not have the one power they thought the King of England used occasionally wisely and mercifully, but it doesn't contemplate that you'll be pardoned for an imagined crime or a crime you never have to talk about, or that by getting the pardon you'll never have to cooperate with a congressional investigation or honor a subpoena or even have to take the fifth. It's a misuse of the concept, not only the power, but the broader idea of what a pardon is. A lot of people think there have been defendants over the years, people convicted of serious crimes, who have refused pardons because they said, I didn't do anything wrong. I'm not taking a pardon. They would take clemency. They would take a commutation of sentence. But they didn't want a pardon because pardon means you're pardoned. Your sin is forgiven. Your crime is taken away. What are the crimes we're talking about? I think you let the process play out. Then, if anybody's ever convicted of anything, you pardon them. And the other half of it is,
but you won't be empowered to pardon them if you're a Democrat. I mean, that's the argument, I think.
Well,
right?
Yeah, okay. But what did I say before? What did Barack Obama say? Elections have consequences.
Sean, what do you think of this use of the pardon power?
Yeah, so I think there's two separate things that get conflated. The first is the scope of the president's pardon power. It's plenary. He can do whatever he wants. No one can do anything about it, except impeach him. And so if he wants to pardon all these people, I think it's within his power to do so. I think there is the question we're talking about, though, is distinct, which is, okay, so what makes a pardon? Can you just say you're blessed for all your sins, like, that you've committed? Like, that's not how confession works, right? You have to list out your sins, and then you get blessed for them. And so I think there's a case to be made that's what you don't get just like a pie in the sky pardon. You have to get pardoned for something. And so that's something that may well be tested. If they put out a blanket pardon, like, Anthony Fauci, you're forgiven for all your transgressions, whatever they may have been. I think there's a good chance that this is going to get tested in court, what the actual scope of the president's pardon power is.
Sean, how would it even be worded? I've never heard of this idea of pardoning somebody for a crime that they've never been charged with. How would you even word a pardon like that?
Yeah, I don't know.
So Tony Fauci, you're pardoned for fraud, embezzlement, theft, perjury, whatever you may have done. I mean, obviously no, but how would it even be worded?
I mean, I think that's how it would have to be worded,
Huh.
that you're pardoned for whatever, for any and all federal offenses committed within the last 10 years.
If you accepted a pardon like that, is it an admission of guilt?
That would be the public perception of it, I think. And that's the problem with it. And that's why some of these, including Adam Schiff, has said that he doesn't want a pardon because he didn't do anything wrong, which sounds about, like a reasonable position to take if you think you've done nothing wrong. I did see a poll today that interested me too. This is an AP poll. Only 20% of Americans support the pardon of Hunter Biden, and only 40% of Democrats.
Too late.
There's a political message here too. I mean, I'm not sure you want to go out, if you're of the Biden administration, pardoning a bunch of people for crimes that then, aren't, you can't list them, but other people will,
Well, that reminds me of a question. I thought, could I ask Sean this?
Sure.
So if Fauci is pardoned by Biden, does that mean that some aggressive state prosecutor in a Republican state can bring charges against him? I mean, you've sort of invited a kind of scrutiny that may not even exist.
Yeah, you can. A president cannot pardon for state offenses. He can only pardon federal offenses. Now,
Right.
the prosecutor wouldn't be able to charge for a federal crime, but he could charge for fraud at a state level, assuming the state somehow had jurisdiction over Fauci.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a mess now. I think what's probably going to happen is that after this, there's also going to be a pardon to Donald Trump and a bunch of Republican officials as kind of a olive branch to kind of offset it. I actually kind of think that would be good. Just like let's clear the table. There's the more hardcore Republicans will say, no, we're not going to pretend like the last 4 years didn't happen. But as far as trying to bring down the simmering that's hitting a boil right now in this country, I think that would be good.
Yeah,
that's a fascinating idea. Would Bob Menendez and Eric Adams be it? We could pardon everybody
right.
and start over.
Right. Well, speaking of pardons, or at least people under fire right now, Alvin Bragg is under fire. He's the district attorney in New York City. He's involved in a number of cases, including the Daniel Penny trial, where the jury returned a not guilty decision. And he is pressing to try to get Donald Trump sentenced before his inauguration for these 34 counts of falsifying business records, or Carl, I'll anticipate this is one count 34 times. Sean, what do you make of Alvin Bragg right now? And do you think Trump could be sentenced before he gets into office?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. I mean, I think it's a terrible idea. I mean, I have always thought the Alvin Bragg prosecution of Trump was a disaster. I thought that other charges brought against Trump had merit, but that one was just obviously a political move on Bragg's part. But I don't know New York State law well enough to know whether he can be sentenced before that. I know they have to try to work out, the immunity, how much the presidential immunity worked into Trump's trial. But I mean, it's just it's a terrible thing, and we're having a actual transition to a presidency. I think if it does go forward, what you're going to see Merchan do is the obvious route for him is to say, look, he's a first-time offender. This is a white-collar crime. I sentence you to like 20 hours of community service.
That was one of the options in Alvin Bragg's office outlined some of the options. And one of them, what you said, Andy, was go ahead and sentence him now. Another was wait until after he's out of office as president and then sentence him. That's an interesting concept. And then the other one was, what Sean said, sort of agree, have a disposition, almost like a post-trial plea bargain, which is an interesting concept in which jail time would be taken off the table and the case would be disposed of. That actually might be the best result, but maybe the better result even yet is to what Heather McDonald argued, in City Journal is to have New York voters recall Alvin Bragg and have a new prosecutor set aside the case.
I looked at that. I don't think they can recall him. That's not part of the New York law. He's up for election in 2025, so he could get primaried in the spring. But it's not like California. That's my understanding, Carl.
That's mine too. And the other thing is nobody prominent person has raised their hand to run against Bragg yet. There's no reason to believe he's not going to win re-election.
Yeah, although Carl, in California and San Francisco and Los Angeles, the district attorneys did lose big time.
In Los Angeles and San Francisco. And also, San Francisco voted out Mayor London Breed, who I don't even know she did anything wrong.
Right.
But so I had nothing against her. It's my home city. I don't vote there anymore. But that there is a rethinking going on of some of the woke excess, if I may use that word.
Yeah. Okay. Well, gentlemen, we got to leave it there. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I've been talking with Carl Cannon and Sean Trende. We'll take a break and be back right after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder, president of RCP. Joined now by Richard Porter. He's a contributor to RCP and a former lawyer and RNC committeeman from the state of Illinois. Richard, good to have you back.
Good to be back, Tom.
All right, so we had you on last week, and we were talking about an article that you wrote for Real Clear Politics about DOGE and how Republicans should handle that. It was sort of a legal argument. This time you wrote something for us, and it's on the website. I urge everybody to go check it out. It's a little cultural criticism, a little movie review, Richard. It's a little change of pace for you, but give our listeners a sense. It's about the movie Gladiator II, and give our listeners and viewers a sense of what you made of that movie.
Well, I have to say I enjoyed the first Gladiator, so I was a little skeptical about going to see the sequel because it's so often the case that sequels just don't achieve the kind of magic that the first film had. I think about the Star Wars is maybe an exception of that, but by and large, the first movie is the great one, and then they're sort of cashing in after that. But this was actually, I thought it was really quite good. It wasn't quite as good as the first Gladiator, but it was still quite as good. And what was really striking to me as I was sitting there listening to the movie was how much this was like a metaphor for the MAGA movement in the United States today. And so as I walked out of the theater, I did a search on whether anyone else had identified the kind of parallels between the scenes and the ideology and the ideas that were driving Gladiator II to what was going on in this country. And what was interesting, Tom, was I found out that the director himself, the director and the producer, he did make that analogy, but he made it exactly backwards. It's like he didn't even see his own movie, or he didn't understand what was going on in the country. Now, to be fair to him, he filmed it in 23, and so he had a perspective on the world and America, and it was kind of in circa 2023, and he wrote it no doubt before that. But he was interviewed in November after the election, after we'd seen how events played out in this country, and he still was comparing Trump to the wrong person in the movie. So I just thought that was fun, that somebody from Hollywood created this art, but he actually got it backwards. And how often do you see an artist who doesn't understand his own art? You know what I mean?
Well, we did. So, first of all, we're talking about Ridley Scott, right?
Yes.
Who's the director, and we're talking about without giving away the movie. No plot spoilers here.
Right.
Denzel Washington's character, and but this. I mean, tell me why you think he had it backwards. I mean, what was it about Ridley Scott's analysis of the movie? And by the way, we have seen, what was it, a couple of years ago with Barbie? Barbie was supposed to be this movie that Greta Gerwig wrote and directed, and it was supposed to be this sort of feminist, manifesto, and turned out actually that a lot of people interpreted it more as a movie for about Ken and about men and masculinity in a positive way. So we have seen this happen a couple of times, but why do you think that Ridley Scott got his own character so wrong?
Well, if you focus on the character and his personality, what the Denzel Washington, by the way, he was brilliant in this film. I think he really is the star, and he's getting some Oscar talk, out of this role. But he's a survivor, and he and he's someone who's achieving things, and he's someone who's outside the system in a way, but becomes part of the system. And so I can see there's sort of this element of that he's thinking about that character. But his role in the film is completely different. His role in the film is as an insider, as someone who basically is of the swamp, the Roman swamp. And so in that sense, and then also, in terms of how he relates with other characters, and I don't want to go too far into the plot.
Don't do it.
Yeah, but so as he relates with other characters, it's so clear that it's really a Democratic operative is who he is, how he uses the government, and also in terms of the play out, and that the Trumpian character is in fact the gladiator, the man who stands up to the system, who's outside the system and fights it to try to purify it, to remove the corruption. And when you think about his appointments and what he's doing, he's appointing people who have been targeted by the government, and who understand the government's moving away from its core functions. So the FBI has been turned into a political operation. And so Kash Patel, who understood this and identified their role in the Russia, a collusion hoax, he's being appointed to go to the agency that went after the Republicans to take the politics out of the FBI again, not to replace the politics, but to remove the politics. And so, and this is essentially, where the gladiator's head is, which is he's trying to refresh. And this is the same thing as the first movie. In this sense, there's an echo to the first one, which is the gladiator is trying to refresh the dream that's Rome. And of course, what the Trump movement is about is refreshing the dream that's America and making America great. And so the whole movement and the role that Trump plays within the movement is of someone who's trying to clean up something that's become corrupt and make it better again. And so to me, that was just so obvious. And it's just interesting that Ridley Scott sort of lost it in the details of what he was doing.
We're speaking with Richard Porter. He's a contributor to RealClearPolitics and a former lawyer and RNC committeeman from Illinois. Richard, you mentioned in this piece, every time we hear Rome mentioned these days, it's always a cautionary tale about America and how we've reached sort of, the late Republic stage right before the fall, and that's where we're headed. And certainly there's a lot of evidence to support that. I cite it all the time. You can see it everywhere. Is that part of the narrative also? And as you mentioned, I'm just thinking of a piece that we ran on RealClearPolitics earlier this week from the American Mind. Adam Elwinger wrote about these sort of, Democrats want to move the country. They believe that, moving the country forward and progress is the change that they want and that they seek, and that Republicans are seeking, as you just kind of mentioned, right? They're seeking change, but to sort of, turn the clock back to a better time in America where things were, back to sort of traditional values or core values, first principles, however you want to put it. And those are the sort of two distinct views of the political parties. And when you put that in the context of America being sort of, late stage Rome, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I would say that our movement today is really more about refreshing first principles as opposed to moving back in time. It's still a very modern idea, but it's an idea that really trusts people to govern themselves. And it trusts people, ordinary citizens, to make choices. And a lot of what we saw through COVID and other elements, what kind of led to the corruption of the government today, was really the belief of Washington elites that they knew better and that it was appropriate to lie to the people because it was just good for them to do what they were being told. And so you had this sort of creeping elitism and embracing of narratives and lies that corrupted the principles that were animating American government. So I think in that sense, I think that's essentially the difference between where the parties are today is the Democratic Party, ironically, has become the elitist party. They look down on ordinary Americans. And the Republican Party is really the idealistic party. It's the party that still believes in that idea, that dream that is America, to put it in the gladiator terms. And that's ultimately what the MAGA movies and MAGA movement is about. And you could see that, in Trump's interview with Kristen Welker this weekend, where he was talking about what revenge really means. And in this context, what revenge means is to make it great again, to remove the politics, to go back to first principles, to shake up the system, and to bring it back to the people. So it's a beautiful thing, and I think it's a very moving thing. And so I just kind of, I encourage people to go see the movie for yourselves and see who you think is right. Do I have it right? Or does Ridley Scott have it right?
The guy who directed the film.
Right.
Or does Richard Porter have the proper interpretation of the movie?
Yeah, I'm just telling you. Tell me if I'm wrong.
Okay. All right. Well, challenge accepted. I've been wanting to see the movie. I have not seen it yet. And so I think, like a lot of folks, I mean, I love the original movie. Whenever it's comes up on, one of the cable channels, I can't turn away. I sit there and watch it, even if it's for the full 3 hours, So I will accept that challenge. I'm going to watch the movie, and we'll have you back, and I'll tell you whether you got it right or wrong.
Okay.
All right.
Love it. That'd be great.
We'll have to leave it there. Richard Porter, thanks for joining me. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tom. Talk to you soon.
All right. And that's going to do it for me. On behalf of Carl and Andy, I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP. And thanks for listening to RCP on Sirius XM. We'll see you back here tomorrow night. Good night.